cryptocurrency and the blockchain. I'm so sorry to mention them.
Yeah.
I'm a skeptic myself, but I try to keep an open mind. What do you guys? First of all, what's PayPal doing on this front? What do you guys?
We certainly stay close to it. And we've experimented with the technology a good bit. As an engineer, I can appreciate the computer science breakthrough that blockchain represents.
Not smoke and mirrors. It is smoke and mirrors, just a little bit, isn't it?
I think the thing that has yet to happen, the real breakthrough of blockchain is this notion of distributed trust. And while that's a major breakthrough, there just aren't a lot of analogs to that for people to look at and say, well, how would you operate something in a sort of fully decentralized trust model? And I think a lot of the early cycles with blockchain have been people trying to go replace well-functioning central brokerages of trust with a distributed system. I think the bigger breakthroughs are going to happen when people start to apply that technology to problems that could only be solved through distributed trust. Right. I think the reason that's been a little slow going is, as I said, people don't have great analogs for that. Like, there's not a great framework for I see 100 different problems that are well solved by decentralized trust because it was a previously unsolved problem. Like, that was the brain.
Well, isn't that what you would say? Because I mean, you guys have already built rails that you would consider secure. It's not like people are constantly defrauding each other on your network, are they?
Well, I mean,
or are they?
Certainly a big part of our value from time. Well, a lot of people will ask us well, does that mean that it's a threat to you? And I look at it and say, anything that helps to bring more innovation is something we want to get behind and that we want to encourage. Yeah. And like I said, I just think that it's going to take more experimentation for people to find the right problems to apply that technology to. I think that technology being applied to some problems that maybe it's not as well suited for, but as you find problems that could only be solved through decentralized trust, then I think you'll see some much more interesting use cases.
Okay, where are you sitting in the blockchain stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly look at some of those, and I think there are interesting examples of, any place where there's not a well-functioning central brokerage, I think are interesting places to go apply the technology. So cross-border currency swaps are a good example. If we're going to go swap dollars to euros, you can do that in milliseconds at a super low cost, right? But say you want to go swap, Kenyan currency to Nigerian currency, that's going to take, many, many days, and you're going to pay a very high fee to go do that because you don't have great functioning central brokerages there. So there's some companies out there that are doing exactly that kind of thing to say, oh, well, what if you use cryptocurrency to go make those currency swaps instead of going through a central brokerage? And they're taking 7 or 8 minutes on the blockchain to settle is way better than the 3 days it might have taken otherwise. But I think that's a good example of where you need the right use case. Kenyan currency to Nigerian currency, great use case. Dollars to euros, maybe not as much because you can settle much faster than what the blockchain could do. Yeah, as a basic transaction processing system, it's a public ledger. Bitcoin, for example, is a public ledger. Taking 7 or 8 minutes to go settle in the world of transaction processing where things happen in milliseconds, it's not a replacement for that kind of transaction processing. But like in that currency swap example, I do think there's other things that it can work well for, and we're definitely staying close to those.
Okay. Jacob, did you want to add something to that? And then I have another question for you on this to follow up on.
No, I mean, from our perspective, I mean, we just try to deliver to our merchants what they're looking for and sort of the most frequently used sort of, payment methods, and sort of Bitcoin up until now has not been one of them.
Right. So that was the second part of it all. Of course, is you've got the blockchain, which can be is a kind of distributed architecture, but then you've got the cryptocurrencies that sit on top of it. How much have you had merchants on the iSettle platform start asking if they can take payments in Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever?
Well, I mean, we were looking into sort of adding that as a payment method. Exactly, adding that as a payment method a couple of years ago. Then the fluctuation, obviously, of the cryptocurrencies, and sort of there is really no demand from sort of offline merchants, at least. That are selling sort of coffee to get paid with Bitcoin. So from that perspective, we haven't done much. But as you said, Bill, you know, where it becomes interesting maybe for us is more sort of from a back-end perspective. If we can sort of replace some internal systems with sort of blockchain, that could make sense. But that's as far as we've pushed it internally.
As Jacob was saying, we follow user demand, and you know we were accepting Bitcoin for a while, and as Jacob said,
you were doing what for a while?
We were accepting Bitcoin for a while.
You were accepting,
with Braintree, and you know, I think the consumer demand's not there for that. But as Jacob was mentioning, we see a lot of consumer demand for alternative payment methods. And so, for example, like we recently launched smart payment buttons, which is democratizing access in the world of e-commerce for small businesses all the way to large businesses to get to whatever form of payment somebody wants to pay with. And so if that does become something that you start to see consumer demand, we've created a scalable infrastructure where a merchant can easily say, oh, well, flip that on for me, and the merchant's not doing a new integration to go add, you know, a locally relevant payment method to go into a new market, or as consumers change their preferences to go add whatever consumers are preferring to pay
Nicely converted the question there, Bill. But just to bring it back to the cryptocurrency, I think that's really important, by the way, what you've just described. It's so fragmented. I mean, once you start looking at payments globally, it's really surprising, because I think people just think that cards, if you live in the West somewhere, you assume card payments, whether it's debit or credit, is all that's needed, but it's really not even
That's exactly what we realized over the last couple of years from our perspective, that, you know, when we started, I think the payment landscape was actually a lot easier for merchants to be dealing with. It was basically MasterCard, Visa, and American Express from a card payment perspective, and then PayPal. But now the multitude of payment options, you know, in the Nordics with Swish, Vipps, mobile pay, you know, these bank-to-bank transfer schemes, that's really, you know, escalating really fast. You know, the demand for those types of payment solutions to be accepted at point of sale is much, much higher compared to crypto.
So no driver yet to try to create your own cryptocurrency or start taking some of the more popular ones.
Not from us.
No. From merchants or buyer consumers or anything like that.
No, I mean just the. If you
do you think it's? Let me put it differently, because I've already asked you this question. But do you think it's a healthy market right now?
Well, I mean, you certainly see that some of what's out there is speculation on the currency. So you got to. I'm certainly not the only one to say this. Lots of folks have talked about this, sort of separating out the technology from the currency. I think the technology, there's a lot of interesting things that will happen. As I was saying before, you just need to apply the technology to the problems that are best suited for it. I think on the currency side, you know, there's certainly been a lot of people that are engaging in currency speculation there, which I don't know that that's a healthy thing, which is why we've chosen not to really participate in that aspect of it. But that doesn't mean that we're not paying very close attention to the technology and what could be there, and even the things I was mentioning. Part of what you do as an innovator is be prepared to adapt as things evolve. And so, like I mentioned on smart payment buttons, like there's a bunch of things like that we're doing to say, well, hey, we know we can't perfectly predict. We want to be flexible such that we're prepared for the fact that you can't perfectly predict how markets evolve, but that we can be flexible and adaptive as markets evolve. There's going to be more change in the world of retail in the next 5 years than there's been in the last 50. And I think the question really is, as those retailers work to adapt, you know, how do you go give them access to the kinds of tools that previously had been reserved only for the largest few? And I think that's a really important thing that, you know, we endeavor to go do, that we want to go give access to the many to engage in those kind of capabilities. But I think that's going to be a very important theme across the industry for the next 10 years, is how do you make it so that many players get to participate in that versus only a privileged few having access to those